Hey everybody, it's the History Teacher. In this episode, we'll be considering the causes of the American Revolution, covering the period 1763 to 1775. In 1763, the 13 American colonies were part of a worldwide British Empire. In that year, Great Britain defeated France in the French and Indian War. Britain's victory resulted in gaining a lot of new territory, including Canada, but because of huge war expenses, they didn't have any money to maintain their conquests. Britain's solution was to halt the geographical expansion of its North American colonies and to get the colonies to pay for their own administrative costs. The first step, and the first immediate cause of the Revolution, was the Proclamation of 1763, which limited the 13 colonies from expanding beyond the Appalachian Mountains. The British said that the purpose was to stop colonists from encroaching upon Native American lands and therefore to reduce conflict. But Americans considered the proclamation an effort to keep the colonies restricted to the coast and therefore keep them relatively weak, small, and dependent on Great Britain. The proclamation started to make some colonists suspicious about what Britain's future intentions were. The second cause was Parliament's passing of the Sugar Act in 1764, which adjusted the tax the colonists paid on molasses, which was widely used throughout the colonies. The previous molasses tax was higher, but it was generally never collected. The new Molasses Act actually lowered the tax, but this time the British were intent on vigorously enforcing the law. Again, after the expensive war with France, Britain badly needed the money. A third cause was the 1765 Stamp Act, which required all legal documents, playing cards, pamphlets, and newspapers to be on specially stamped and taxed paper. The British said they intended to use the revenue to pay for protecting the 13 colonies, which sounded nice, but the colonists didn't believe it. After the French and Indian War, Britain controlled all of North America, so who exactly did the colonists need protection from? Colonists thought the Stamp Act was just a way of asserting greater control of the colonies. Representatives from 9 of the 13 colonies met in New York to protest the Stamp Act as unconstitutional and, quote, taxation without representation, meaning money was just being extracted from them without their consent, which contradicted centuries of English tradition. In response to the pressure, which included effective boycotts of British goods, Parliament repealed the Stamp Act but passed, in 1767, the Declaratory Act, in which Parliament affirmed its right to tax the colonies, quote, in all cases whatsoever. Later that year, Parliament gave the colonists their fourth reason to rebel, with the passage of the Townsend Duties, named after Charles Townsend, Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer or Finance Minister. The Townsend Duties were taxes on paper, lead, paint, tea, glass, material which was used primarily by lawyers, merchants, and other professionals, that is, the kind of people who could make the most trouble for Britain. The colonists once again complained of taxation without representation, once again engaged in effective boycotts of British products, and once again Parliament was annoyed. Troops were sent to Boston the following year, 1768, to manage any political unrest instigated by the radicals in that city. 2 years later, in March 1770, some of those Boston radicals were harassing a group of troops by throwing rocks and snowballs at them. One soldier was knocked over by a snowball and his musket accidentally discharged, but that gunshot prompted other soldiers to fire into the crowd, killing 5 Bostonians. This was the Boston Massacre. The following month, Parliament repealed the Townsend Duties, buckling to pressure by British merchants whose businesses were suffering because of the colonial boycott prompted by the duties. A fifth cause was the Tea Act of 1773, which permitted the English East India Company to sell tea directly to the colonies. Colonial tea merchants, who were the middlemen, were cut out, and colonists resented the monopoly on the tea trade that the Tea Act effectively granted. Although the new arrangement actually meant that tea would be cheaper, colonists objected to the underlying principles. In December 1773, a colonial group called the Sons of Liberty, dressed as Mohawk Indians to symbolize unconquerable liberty, dumped shiploads of tea into Boston Harbor, and this was the Boston Tea Party. Parliament's angry response in June 1774 resulted in the sixth cause, the Coercive Acts, which Americans called the Intolerable Acts. The acts required that Boston Harbor be closed until the destroyed tea was paid for, town meetings were prohibited, the new governor was to be a military commander, General Thomas Gage, and the authority of the governor was enhanced. At the same time, Parliament passed the Quebec Act to organize the Canadian territory which it had won in the French and Indian War. The Quebec Act expanded the boundaries of Quebec into the Ohio Valley, which was land that was coveted by the American colonists. The act also established that Quebec would be ruled by an appointed council instead of a representative assembly. To the colonists, this showed that Britain was becoming hostile to colonial self-government and to the growth of the 13 colonies. The purpose of the Coercive Acts was to strongly subject the wayward people of Massachusetts to firm royal authority. Colonists everywhere got the message. If such harsh measures could be imposed on Massachusetts, then every colony was at risk of the same treatment. The emergency of the Intolerable Acts prompted representatives of most of the colonies to meet in Philadelphia in September 1774 to figure out how to respond. This was the First Continental Congress. But events moved faster than the delegates did at the Continental Congress. In April 1775, British troops and Americans skirmished at Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts, both American victories. After that, although there were some efforts to peacefully reconcile British and American interests, it was perhaps inevitable that the issue of British authority in the American colonies would be decided by force of arms rather than by words. The Revolutionary War would be the next stage of the American Revolution. All right, there you have the major causes of the American Revolution. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.